Hi, welcome to this video about AGOGO by Jolin. AGOGO is a 6 HP wide octal low-pass gate, but because all of the channel outputs are normalized to the next channel inputs, you can use AGOGO to mix signals together, audio rate or control voltages, by stacking signals together, which I'm essentially doing right now. You can create a very nice sounding saturation or rounding of the peaks. And because of all the normalizations and the fact that the CV inputs are normalized to each other as well, you can use AGOGO as kind of a modulation matrix where you connect two or more CV signals to the inputs or extract different versions of them from the several outputs by gating them with different signals. You could use AGOGO as a multiple where you, again, mix several signals together and extract multiple versions of them. You can also use AGOGO as a simple amplifier. You can send pitch CV through it, and when you then send in a 5-volt gate, the pitch CV goes through unchanged, but then when you start gating the vectorals inside AGOGO, you can create kind of slew or portamento effects. And I'm sure there's even more uses for AGOGO, as I've just described a few of them. I want to thank Federico from Jolin, by the way, for sending me this unit so I can explore it a little bit and make a kind of comprehensive video about it. My main goal for this video is showing that AGOGO is not simply 8 vectorals mounted into one PCB panel, and you can do far more with it than just using it as a low-pass gate times 8. AGOGO is available as an assembled unit. You can also DIY this unit. There's several options for that on the website of Jolin as well. So depending on your skill level and patience, you can get one of these units rather cheap or a little bit more expensive if you buy the assembled one. Let's listen to a few patch examples that I made with AGOGO, and then after those patch examples I will show you how the normalization on AGOGO works in a little bit more detail, because it can be a little bit confusing and I think it's important to know what's happening. Let's have a closer look at AGOGO. And even though Federico from Jolin told me that I really shouldn't approach AGOGO as just an octal low-pass gate, I just know that a lot of people will be very excited by this functionality alone. So to get that out of the way, I want to just demonstrate how the different channels on AGOGO sound and how different they sound from using a regular VCA to attenuate a signal. And don't mind the cable mess here. I will explain in a minute what's happening there. But just as a very short introduction to a low-pass gate and AGOGO in general, you send a signal into the inputs. So this complete first row are inputs. You send some kind of CV signal or gate into the second input marked V here. These inputs control how much the vectoral inside these low-pass gates opens and closes. And you could look at these middle inputs here as the low-pass gate versions of the CV input on a 2-quadrant multiplier, by which I mean a VCA that does not handle negative CV signals. And then of course you can extract the output, which is the attenuated signal from the last row here. Or is this a column? I never know if a column is vertical or a row is vertical. When I just patch something into the CV inputs, you can see that the first channel has a white LED and that the second channel has a red LED. And this continues downwards, so the LED for the third channel is a white LED again, and then the fourth channel has a red LED, and so on. And these different color LEDs visualize that there's a difference between the odd and the even channels of AGOGO. The vectorals inside are a little bit different. And to demonstrate this, I made this cable cluster here. And I'll explain this routing a little bit. So I'm sending in a saw wave, which we can hear, to the inputs. I've used a stack cable to melt it to the fourth channel as well. Then there's an envelope coming from METS that I'm sending into the CV input. It's again melted with a stackable, so it's also going into the CV input for the fourth channel. And then these outputs are just going through the oscilloscope, which I'll show in a minute, and then through to the mixer. And actually I've melted the saw wave and the CV signal to a VCA as well, just so I can demonstrate how different a VCA sounds from a low-pass gate. And actually we've been listening to a VCA this whole time, just so you have a very good reference in your head of how this sounds. So like I said, in a minute I will show you the scope. But for now, let's just listen. So I'll mute the VCA. And I'll unmute the signal that's coming out of the third channel output here. Let's now listen to the output of the fourth channel. Let's listen to the VCA again. Let's listen to the first output here again. And now the fourth output. And you can already hear that the fourth output is, yeah, it's a lot smoother or round sounding. it has less sharp peaks. And to show this in detail, I will move my camera so you can just see the scope view. So let's mute everything for a moment. The top trace is the output of the third low pass gate on AGOGO. The second, the blue trace, is the output of the fourth channel of AGOGO, so that's a different character factorial inside. And then the yellow trace here is just an output of a VCA that's getting the same saw wave and the same envelope to modulate the amplitude. So let's listen to the VCA again. Let me remove the volt-per-octave sequence from my VCO, and let me also remove the modulation of my decay for my envelope. Let's listen to the third low-pass gate output, which is the green signal. And let's now listen to the fourth output, which is the blue signal. The green signal again. And the blue signal. And you can really hear that the blue signal is a lot more round. And let me try to stop my oscilloscope here. And I hope that you can see this, that the green trace, being the one we're listening to now, especially when you compare it to the output of the VCA, you can see that there's a little bit of a rounding off here. And then you can see on the blue trace, which I've unmuted now, that this rounding is a little bit more pronounced. And this is just a side effect of the behavior of a factorial, which is in essence just an LED with a light sensitive sensor next to it. And whenever the LED lights up, the light sensitive sensor reacts to that. But there's a little bit of lag, or you could say that the factorial is a little bit slow, and this causes, on audio signals, a little bit more rounding off of the shapes, which make them sound a little bit more warm. And when you use a low-pass gate to open and close CV signals like LFOs or whatever you want, this makes sure that the fades are always smooth. You won't get clicks or pops when you attenuate a signal with a gate or anything. Sometimes factorials are also used in mixers for the mutes, so the mutes are silent or don't click. Let's briefly listen to the first signal again. The second. And let's go back to the VCA, which is the yellow trace. And now let me try to demonstrate how the normalization on AGOGO works and how you can use it or break it. To show you how these normalizations work, let me first explain this patch. I'm sending a sine wave LFO with the black cable here into the first input of AGOGO. For the moment I'm sending a gate into the CV input. This is just a random gate coming from Zularic repetitor. It has this functionality when you turn it to the last setting. And then the output of all of this is going into the frequency modulation input of a filter. So if I change the random gate out for just static voltage. Right now I'm sending in 5 volts coming from mats. You can hear that the sine wave that I'm sending in is just modulating the frequency of my filter. Into this filter I'm sending a wavetable coming from beats. This wavetable is going through Paradam, which is a versatile distortion unit from Cosmotronic, and from there it's going straight into the audio input of the filter that I'm modulating with the output of Agogo here. And with a steady 5 volts going in here, I can demonstrate that the second output of Agogo outputs the same LFO but twice the amplitude. You can clearly hear the difference when I switch back to the first one. And as we saw in the sound or patch examples, you can really see that the signal gets stronger the more you go down. And of course, at a certain point, it really starts clipping, which you can use for your benefit to shape what was a sine LFO is now more something like a square. And as I explained somewhere at the beginning of the video, everything is normalized down. But this means that the inputs are normalized down, the CV inputs are normalized down, but actually the outputs are just mixed together. And this is why the second output sends out a signal with twice the amplitude, because it's just as if the LFO is sent into the first input as well. The CV input is also receiving the 5 volts that we're sending in here. And because the result of this is the same as it is here, when we use the second output, that the signal is twice the amplitude, because the output of the first channel is just mixed in with the output of the second channel, which is pretty much the same, but with a little bit of a different character because of the different factorals in here. And of course, as you go down, more output channels are mixed together and the signal just becomes louder. Well, let's now unplug this signal going to the mixer. I'll just dangle the cable here. And let's listen to what the second output is doing now. So I'll just reconnect this yellow cable to the frequency input of my filter. And now you can hear that when we're actually using the first output, it is not getting mixed together with the second one. You'll clearly hear this when I remove this cable. Another thing that we can do to break the normalization here is connect something to an input. At this point, the input signal is no longer normalized to the second input, so the LFO is no longer getting through to the yellow cable and to the filter. So by using consecutive channels completely, by which I mean using signals connected to the input and the output, you can in fact use these as 8 different channels that don't get mixed or normalized together. So right now this cable is still dangling from the first output, and I'm using the output of the second channel to modulate my filter. When I now close the signal going into the first modulation input, the second output is attenuated as well. And instead of using just a static voltage going into the CV input, let's use a random gate again. And let's try doing something else here. I'll reconnect this white cable coming from the first channel here to the filter modulation. And I'll use the signal coming from the yellow cable to move around the wavetable in beats. Now I can connect a different random gate to this CV input. And all these flashing LEDs now just follow the CV signal that I'm sending into this second channel of AGOGO. And at this point I'm just sending in one sine wave LFO, and I'm using two channels of AGOGO to extract different gated versions of that to modulate different parameters around my patch. Now I can go ahead and use another output, for example, to modulate the pitch of beats. For the moment, this is just following the gated pattern that I'm sending into the second channel, but I can, of course, send in yet another pattern. And again, to break the normalization, I can just connect a dummy cable again. And as I'm using channel 3 to modulate the pitch of beats, I broke the normalization. The pitch is not changing. Until, of course, I connect this dummy cable to another CV source. Let's use a stepped random LFO. And this stepped random LFO is now being gated by a random pattern that's different from the other channels. But if I now remove this gated pattern, channel 3 will just use the gate from channel 2. And if I now connect something to the fourth output here, and let's just run this into the drive input on Paradigm. We're in effect using the stepped random that I'm sending into channel 3 of AGOGO to modulate the drive setting on Paradigm, gated by the signal that we're sending into channel 2. And this is why AGOGO is not simply just an octal low-pass gate, it is really more a modulation matrix. And if I now, for example, want to use one of the channels of the low-pass gate to attenuate my audio signal, I can do that as well by just connecting it to one of the channels I'm connecting the output back to my mixer. But now, of course, this channel is being gated by the pattern that I'm sending into channel 2. But I can change this, of course, when I connect another pattern to it. And if you're not sure if something from above is bleeding through, and I don't mean channel bleed like you can sometimes have with Vectorals, there is none on AGOGO, but I mean sometimes these normalizations can be very confusing. So if you want to be 100% certain that none of the channels from above are getting through, you can just connect some dummy cables to the inputs and outputs of the channel above the one you're concerned about, and that fixes that. Before I finish this video about AGOGO, I wanted to show you at least one example of using AGOGO as a mixer. In this patch I'm just sending in 3 differently tuned VCOs, each with their own CV. For the first 2 I'm using gate patterns, and on the third one I'm using a sine wave to open and close the low pass gate. And then I'm extracting the mix of all of this from the bottom output here. I can of course use outputs higher up. These are a little less distorted or saturated. And of course, as I've explained before, the lower you go, the more saturated these become. And well, that's going to be it for this video about AGOGO by Jolin. As I've mentioned in my video about Ashiko, even though these panels are PCB, these are very sturdily made. And because Federico is using PCB material, he is able to make these translucent panels, which would be completely impossible when using aluminium. We see a similar thing on certain Make Noise modules, and I know 3-tom modular uses PCB material for this reason as well. I'm not afraid this module is going to break on me. Everything is really bolted on very nicely. And I mean, there's a lot of nuts here and none of them are loose, which you can sometimes see on cheap clones or modules that aren't really manufactured that well, that these nuts get loose. And I am very much annoyed when that happens, because then there's something rattling and sometimes it takes a moment to figure out what's the cause of this. So no loose nuts here. Very sturdy module. I actually really like the sound of the low pass gates in AGOGO, but I very much appreciate all the normalizations as well. Once you get your head around how to use them to your advantage and how to break the normalizations if that's needed, this can be really a modulation powerhouse, as well as still being able to mix signals together and use some channels just as low pass gates. And I find I'm really enjoying low pass gate as just a change from just using VCAs and filters all the time. I find it really refreshing coming from a subtractive synthesis background to using different kind of techniques to shape the volume and timbre at the same time. If you liked this video and you like the feature set on AGOGO, please share it with someone who is not familiar with the module. And if you really liked the video, you could support my work. You can use Patreon or Ko-fi for this. Links are of course in the description box. Thank you very much for watching my video about AGOGO. I hope you learned something. See you next time. Bye!